All right. Welcome, everyone, to the new Indian Express's weekly video series, Global Express. This is where we look at developments in our neighborhood and beyond, how it impacts India, the emerging power in the Indian Ocean region and the Indo-Pacific. Do click on the new Indian Express website and tweet and follow Global Express. Today's focus is a country and a people with whom we share a date of freedom from colonial rule or a return to barbarity. That's a matter of some debate. August 15th is India's Independence Day. It's also the day in 2021 that Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, was overrun by the Taliban militia, and US forces beat a chaotic retreat from this graveyard of empires. It changed the strategic dynamics of the region. It dented India's heft. It has also forced India to recalibrate its Afghan policy. The most shocking aspect over the last 2 years has been the brutal and horrific treatment of Afghan women by the Taliban, deprived of an education, of earning a livelihood, of being able to walk on the streets, of having a voice, even shutting down, in their latest act, beauty salons. And now, a searing indictment of the Taliban this week by the United Nations Security Council. It points to strong links between the Taliban and Al Qaeda. It says Al Qaeda has infiltrated Taliban high level decision making circles, including the General Directorate of Intelligence under the charge of Sirajuddin Haqqani. An attack in the neighboring province in Pakistan of in KPK has been blamed on the Taliban, but the Taliban has denied any responsibility. To take us through the changing dynamics of a country we had long seen as a friend, the enemy's enemy, so to speak, and whether it's time to re-engage with Afghanistan, is one of the most prominent female leaders in Afghanistan, Shukria Barakzai, a feisty, fearless Afghan politician, former member of parliament from Kabul, journalist, former ambassador to Norway. She's been honored with the International Editor of the Year award. She survived the car bomb attack, and her harrowing escape as the Taliban came looking for her still makes your hair stand on end. Welcome to the program, Ms. Barakzai. Also on the show is Sumeer Bhasin, who's both a businessman with deep links to Afghanistan and a perceptive strategic analyst involved with various think tanks and track two dialogues, who has co-authored various papers on a country he understands and connects with like few others. And I'm immensely pleased to have noted scholar, author, and academic Avinash Paliwal on the show. He is reader in international relations at SOAS University of London, and the author of My Enemy's Enemy, India and Afghanistan from the Soviet invasion to the US withdrawal. Mr. Paliwal will join us shortly. Let's start with you, Ms. Barakzai. You escaped from the Taliban by the skin of your teeth, but hundreds and thousands of women and girls are facing the kind of harassment and regressive brutality today that you personally faced when the Taliban took power in 1991. So earlier this week, on July 30th, the special representative for Afghanistan, Thomas West, the special envoy for Afghan women and human rights, Reena Amari, and the chief of the US mission to Afghanistan based in Doha, Karen Decker, met the Taliban representatives and technocratic professionals in Doha, in the Qatari capital. They asked Taliban to reverse their policies on women and girls, asked them to address the deteriorating human rights situation, the disappearances, the media crackdown. Does it look like just talk, Ms. Barakzai? Will a mere appeal work? What is the need of the hour? And what leverage does the US or West really have here?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to share my opinion regarding the misery of Afghanistan. To be honest, the late meeting between Reena, Tom, and Taliban representative, that was a kind of meeting which is, at least through to the media, it was very shocking, because the Taliban side says they talk and they aim like to defreeze the fortune of Afghanistan or the capital of Afghanistan, and removing the sanctions from the Taliban and opening the embassies and cooperating with the Taliban and recognition of the Taliban as a state. But on the other side, the American side, they say that the meeting is about the human rights and women's rights situation in Afghanistan, inclusive government and rule of law. So if you see the two different perspectives and two different let's say, agenda where Taliban were looking for and US, you can say where they are. There's no common agenda that even they could talk about it. And when they say that some technocrats in the government, I was really surprised that if we like or not, a US, United Nations, and most of countries before August 2021, they were engaged with the Taliban. That's not something new. But giving certain...
In fact, I want to ask you, you were present during the Doha talks, weren't you?
No, I myself, I denied. I was been asking to go and join that.
So they didn't let you participate?
No,
was it an agenda issue or was it a...
No. I personally, I refused. I refused to be part of that negotiation team. I had my own concern about it because the legitimacy of that talks comes from the Doha Agreement, where the Doha Agreement was not in the benefit of the people of Afghanistan. If you read the Doha Agreement, it was clear that the Afghanistan will be handed over to the Taliban. For instance, in Doha Agreement, it was been says that the Taliban are in charge, or they are making sure that no one will attack on US or US allies from Afghanistan. So that's, you are asking a group of state, or according to Doha Agreement, Taliban will not issue passport or visa for Al-Qaeda or any other terrorist groups. So that's a state had the authority to issue a passport and visa, not the Taliban. At that time, Taliban was just, and because that shameful agreement was been signed on 29th of February 2020. So in 2020, the legitimate government of Afghanistan was in power. But the way that the agreement says that sooner or later, the power will be shifted to the Taliban. So it's not a victory that now Taliban are claiming, or it's not a pre-plan that US are acting. So the shocking thing was like how United States of America can be a partner with such a terrorist group, where in 2001, they kicked them out. In 2021, they bring them back. What was been changed in the nature of Taliban? This is the question. And where are the women? Where are the human rights? And where those slogans that they came with, the beautiful words that this time we learned from our mistake during 90s, we will not let the people of Afghanistan to be alone. So now they say, okay, we are engaged. We are not letting the people of Afghanistan to be alone. But technically, people of Afghanistan or in Afghanistan is now leading by a terrorist group, where every minute something could happen, not only to Afghanistan, but also outside of the world, because Afghanistan become a safe haven for all single individuals.
We'll get to that. I just wanted to ask you also about this last meeting in Doha. If we can go back to that just for a minute. The Taliban has got an agenda, which is basically to gain recognition, but across the world, it needs that so that it can. But is it still functioning? With funds and so on, and arms and ammunition. So it still rules by fear. Am I right?
Yeah, the Taliban is always, they are ruling by fear. The only power they had is with the fear, with their barbaric behaviors towards people. They keep the power across the country at the moment.
So what is the leverage that the US has? Does it have leverage at all over the Taliban to force them to?
Of course. I think it's just a game. We have to wait and watch. It's too soon. It's too early, because I myself, like 2 years back, especially immediately after collapse, I couldn't believe that was a part of game. But what I saw inside of the airport, and later on, I realized after the trauma, like, okay, that's how can be. Taliban and US soldier are confronting each other within a meter 1 meter distance, but they were quite nice to each other. They didn't attack on each other, where they fighting and they killing other innocent civilians in the last 20 years. So that's, and nowadays, how possible without any kind of leverage, where according to Seaguard, the special reporter for Afghanistan or US, they $8 billion pumped in Afghanistan. Not true to UN channel. True to UN channel was only $2 billion. But if you see $8 billion unofficially was been pumped, of course, US has leverage on Taliban. That was the US that empowered the Taliban, kicked them from the power, bring them back to the power. But that's the complexity of the region, because US cannot find any other space and place where it can easily interrupt China, Russia, and Iran in one. So all three in one. So that's why US can play way better role in Afghanistan to disturb the security of the region or to make a headache for entire region.
That's a very good point. If I can just bring you in, Mr. Bhasin, it's good to have you on our show.
Thank you.
You've kept an eagle eye out on the Doha talks before the Taliban takeover. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, but you did prod the Indian envoy. I know you'll never admit to it in public, with the active encouragement of the US Special Envoy on Afghanistan, Ambassador Khalilzad, to reach out to the Taliban during the Doha dialogue. What was the reasoning behind that? What did you believe India stood to gain by talking to a group like Taliban? And
So
also, if we can actually get you to also comment on the humanitarian aggressions by the Taliban over the last 2 years. Do you feel that it's because there's no real control over these groups that prey on on and victimize people?
So taking from Ms. Barakzai's issue means inputs. She said the game. So for me, this is Great Game 4.0. Great Game 1.0 was during the British Raj, right? 2.0 was the Soviet US proxy war, which ended with the end of the Cold War and the breakdown of the Soviet Union. 3.0 was post 9/11, and this is 4.0. So I view it's very unfortunate, but as she
You
pointed,
lived through 3.0.
this is
20 years.
Yeah, this is 4.0. Like Ms. Barakzai very clearly pointed out that it's this, they've gone, they're making the same bet with the people they fought for 20 years, right? So it's the US sees it as my view is more from as a geopolitical analyst, whose interest is is foremost. So I see the US's interest of having, as she rightly pointed out, in their bare geopolitical, especially in the context of the Ukraine crisis, we should not forget that post-pandemic, is what are their primary interests in Afghanistan. And, so they are interested in the welfare of the Afghan people, but that's secondary to the other geopolitical interests. And as she rightly pointed out, that what I called terrorist groups, you nowadays notice not much talk on terrorism in the world. If you notice, earlier it was a prime headline item, so I call them non-state.
But now the UN Security Council has actually nailed the Taliban for providing a safe haven to the Tehrik-e-Taliban and the the Islamic the Uyghur group and people like that, and they're talking about a new group altogether called Tajikistan, Tehrik-e-Tajikistan.
So
which is a bit worrying.
these groups, you have to also understand these groups, most of them cannot operate or exist without some sort of linkage. We used to always call Pakistan a state sponsor of terrorism, which everyone knows. But the West, as we saw in the whole cases of ISIS, the geopolitics of states using non-state actors as proxies is very, very real and very open. They don't admit it, but naturally, but for all of us, it's very clear. They cannot exist without finances, without logistical supports, etc. Coming back to the
But
Taliban.
can we go back to India? Why you, sort of
So I'll just
encourage
finish the
India
issue
to,
on Taliban. Taliban has come back to power. It is very unfortunate because Afghans are a very resilient uh, people with a very progressive mindset. We've seen that Afghanistan from the 70s and then till the Russian time, and then Taliban 1.0 and now Taliban 2.0, and we saw the free will of the people and building of institutions, etc. That all has been unfortunately reversed. And as far as India is concerned, and their linkage to the terrorist groups is but natural because they existed on the other side of the Durand line, predominantly fighting. So they were organized like that. And those terrorist groups agree, even that time in other various forms existed in Afghanistan and Pakistan and operated, right? So that is continuing to happen. So you can always say whatever in terms of whether the Taliban will be able to formulate a nation state, governance model based on a constitution and based on a running functioning state under what model. What I hear now is that they will probably
before we get to the what the Taliban's aiming for, could we talk about what you wanted, why you wanted India to create this kind of conversation with the Taliban? What did you think? What was the benefit?
I didn't want that, but I was realistic in terms of seeing that, which way the US was headed. Barakzai pointed out, the US's Ambassador Khalilzad's first mandate was safe withdrawal of US troops. So I've interacted with him very closely, and he wore two hats. One was the US hat, which was his primary hat. He happened to be an Afghan, so Afghans expected him to be much more sensitive to Afghan needs. But primarily, I'm not taking sides, but primarily his primary mandate was withdrawal of US troops. But to leave
US troops,
and she rightly pointed out, the US at that time was actually was not a very clear mediator. So they were talking to Taliban at the same time supporting the Afghan government to fight them. So you have to understand, the fight was continuing while the talks were, which never happens, right? And there was all this talk about a ceasefire. So it was very apparent that the US's primary interest was going out and Taliban coming in, which was, it was question of time. Although a lot of us, not a lot of us, but a lot of people hoped that the US would not leave and, somehow the policy would reverse after Biden came in. But he fast forwarded what Trump agreed to, or the Trump administration agreed to.
So you don't fully support what Mr. Khalilzad did?
Mr. Khalilzad mandated, but he did one part of the agreement. He was able to do his intention. Means the intention was to finish the second part, which was an intra-Afghan dialogue and what we call an inclusive government. But as she rightly pointed out, once he signed and agreed with them, US's primary interest was accomplished, and the leverage vanished. The leverage,
and also it legitimized the Taliban to a great extent.
Yeah, so the leverage to force them to come to an intra-Afghan dialogue and a compromise on what should be the future of Afghanistan internally was, vastly reduced. And if you remember, 29th February 20 is when the pandemic came in, and the timing was bad that way also, because logistically now people are not traveling. Most of the countries were focused resource and attention wise to their own problems, health crisis in their own countries. So it withdrew.
Mr. Bhasin, before I go to Ms. Barakzai on the human, the tragedy that has unfolded, I also want to ask about India's, over 500 projects, including the Haji Jack mines, the Salma Dam, I mean, we've been involved in, in steel and power plants. What has happened to, and this is all under the protection of, our own troops. I mean, the ITB, BP, was it? And our border patrol and US troops. So there was a great, sort of protective sort of ring around all the projects that we did. Are they fully finished? I mean, will the Taliban? Does the Taliban want us to come back? Does the Islamic Emirate want us to come back and finish the pending projects?
Yes, Taliban, as is known in the public domain, has, in fact, in this budget, in the Indian budget in February, we gave another $25 million, and even their spokesperson Shoail Sain came on an Indian, I remember, Hindustan Times, and welcomed that decision. And so Taliban have always said that India, when you say Taliban, and I know what you were referring to when you say enemy is enemy. See that Pakistan factor, which was overplayed, that and before
overplayed.
Yeah, it was to an extent overplayed in the sense we didn't understand the dynamics, which is turning true now. I wrote then. See, we have had a long history of a good relationship in terms of goodwill with Afghans. Right? Directly.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Right? The Indira Gandhi Hospital, where all
on a people-to-people level.
Russian mine victims, yes.
Because of Bollywood, because of various factors, trade, etc. What did India do without, we always suspected, let's be very clear, mainly the Pashtuns, which are predominant part of Taliban is the Pashtuns, on their nexus with the the ISI specifically, right?
Yes.
That was always a concern for India. But I think we overplayed that concern beyond a point, because one way you say you have immense goodwill, which I have traveled the world and I have never seen that anywhere in the world with the Afghans, And in fact, it was the reverse. I used to there travel, and when I introduced myself as an Indian to even a soldier on the street, he said, with my, please excuse my Farsi, he said, I said, my India, he used to say that Hindustan dile mas jane mas. And the binary used to be, I don't want to use the word here, but for them it was the reverse. It was India is our best friend. And when they spoke about India, then they automatically said Pakistan is our, FMFs, whatever. So, point is,
and India's reopened its embassy. It's one of 4 countries that is reopened its embassy. Technical mission.
India also, you have to understand, with our thing with China. So one is our bilateral purely with the Afghans, with helping Afghan state, progress and become strong on its own. Pre this Taliban deal, it was like, okay, the Indian policy was, as far as I know, is that a strong state will help counter Pakistan. If they become economically stronger, they progress, it creates a state who are our friends. Okay. Post Taliban, we had China. The considerations were, as I understand, is our problems with China and the influence of China to counter Pakistan. We know about CPEC and other things to counter Pakistan and China's influence in Afghanistan, and continue to maintain relationship with Afghans for 2 reasons. One is the geopolitical interest. Other is still able to, logistically make whatever. We have a technical team there now in the embassy. We've not recognized them, so it's not an ambassador, but they call it a technical team. Is to also continue to support and some of those projects and provide humanitarian aid. So we've been providing food and medicines. We have given technical assistance to the Afghanistan Bank, and we continue to engage with the Taliban, because you cannot do all that without engaging with the Taliban.
Yeah, but there is confusion, isn't there, Mr. Bhasin, about the Indian embassy? I mean, the Afghan embassy in Delhi itself. I mean, we don't know who the ambassador is. I don't know what the diplomatic missions are like in Washington and London and other countries. Do they function under the Islamic Emirate, or are they still staffed by people from the previous administration?
So what I understand is that Russia, Iran, China, I'm correct, they still don't recognize. So when you say embassy, if you don't recognize a government, how will you recognize an embassy?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So let
You
me
have
just go back to Ms. Barakzai for a minute. So, Ms. Barakzai, so the upheaval on ordinary people, the disruption of the daily lives of the people. I mean, within Afghanistan, I mean, I know that from 1991 to 2001, when the Taliban were in power, they used to stone women to death and accuse them of all kinds of things in public. But people still live in fear, as we talked about. My friend said if he didn't, one of my friends who travels in and out of Kabul said if he doesn't open his mouth, stays below the radar, he could go in and out of the country and visit his parents. But outside the country, it is a vastly different story, Ms. Barakzai. I mean, in the 15 years that India and Afghanistan have worked together, they've had 60,000 Afghan students study in India. And I don't know how many are still left, and I believe they're in very bad shape because they're stranded. The universities that they study with, are refusing to further their education. 2,500 students have had their visas revoked. What is their future? What are we going to do about the healthcare that we provided in India for a lot of Afghans? Ms. Barakzai, please do come in.
Okay. First of all, Afghanistan is right now in a very unique situation where the Taliban are not really taking responsibility as a state. They are not state, they are just a group of fighters. It will be our misjudgment to ask them to rule governance and have parliament or make a constitution or introduce themselves in a international standard where after 2 years, even they don't know what is their own definition of existing in being a Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan. Who's the Amir and how the cabinet will function, where's the citizens of Afghanistan and what is the fundamental rights to be recognized and check and balance of power. So we left this part because nothing is existing under the name of government inside of Afghanistan at the moment. And I think life.
Yeah, but that's a very good point. The fact that the people who rule Afghanistan, so to speak, are not, basically they don't have the wherewithal to understand what governance means.
Yes, of course, that's the reality after 2 years, and it may continue. What is the inside of Afghanistan? Unfortunately, people, because of fear, they cannot even raise their voice. There's no freedom of expression anymore. Even the telephone, even the WhatsApp are going to be traced and monitored by the Taliban and their technical support, where technical we know comes from where. So that is like the people of Afghanistan are being hijacked or like a presence living inside of Afghanistan. If you see the demand for passport, to having a passport or demand for visa, any country, anywhere in the world, if they could manage to escape, they will do. Those whom they survived, at least if it's 65,000 or more or less than that, there are international organizations. According to Declaration of Human Rights, they can be under protection of international organizations such as the United Nations. I think it might not be the nice thing to force them and send them back to the country where women understand there's no job for them. Men understand there will be no space for them to work. And even to have to study in India for some Taliban, even just having a relationship with Indian, because we pay a lot of high price from 2001 till 2021. The massive killing of Afghans, where was Indian embassy, Indian entrepreneurs, Indian safe house, it was been targeted and it was been attacked. So in international arena, Afghanistan was always stand with the India, because that friendship is not based on politics. That friendship is a friendship between nation to nation, something very natural, where politics cannot disturb it. And now I think how we can see that, I believe those educated, fresh blood from Afghanistan, where they are very talented, and we are grateful from every country that they provide education opportunity for them. It's time for them to use as a
I heard from a friend of mine in Afghanistan that they are asking women to do Zoom call education, in the sense that teachers are basically giving Zoom call lessons to students, because I believe even the new syllabus that the Taliban could bring in, will have no legitimacy. I mean, it has no recognition. What the kids will learn will not be, of any value.
Yeah, so
That's what
just
I hear.
back to Afghanistan, because they are from Afghanistan in that circumstances, in this situation, it means forcing them to the death, actually, or make them to go for a way where there's no guarantee of their life. I know India is not responsible for their life, but I think this is not a big number. It is a small number compared to India population and to international organization responsibility. Under certain management, it's possible to manage and use that talented fresh blood as a work labor inside, outside of India.
But does it also mean that that the Taliban, that the United Nations, or the representatives of the governments that are dealing with the Taliban should show them the right path, should basically guide them into saying that sort out the internal issues with your militia, which is preying on people, and have a standardized army, because I saw what you said about cigar. So $8 billion is not small change, and I believe there's another $18 billion which could go Afghanistan's way. So the Taliban does have has to sort out that difference between the Kandahar and Qatar, and the people in Qatar and Kandahar. Do you think that could happen? I mean, then could it be something that we could see in the future? Sirajuddin Haqqani or Sayaf, or somebody more pragmatic.
Yeah, this is something where I could say that Taliban are using that one to chase the international community and to gain more time.
That was actually my next question.
Because if the Taliban were like a united force during 90s when they ruled, one order was like one order, that's it. But today Taliban are not like that time Taliban. Yes, their behavior true to the women become even more harsh, sexually torturing, mentally they are abusing women. But they always never believe the human rights in international principle. But nowadays they show even they don't accept the principle of Islam. That their behavior shows clearly that. But it's Taliban just to maintain their power. Technically, maybe they divide themselves within a two group. I don't know how we can call it a terrorist, like a good terrorist and bad terrorist, and saying it comes like a modern Taliban and a conservative Taliban. I cannot see that modernity on their action the first day. Yes, they are trying to say, like sometimes to accuse their leaders on the public that we are supporting women's education, all girls education, but nothing in practice. How come under the same Minister of Interior and Minister of Defense rule, where they are in charge, rule of law and everything, there are other groups where kidnapping is an issue, forcing people, sending mosque prayers, dress code, everything, banning women's and men from lots of activity, destroying the even music instrument, banning
yes,
beauty.
that's awful.
Things are
I was in the first time when I went to Kabul, as I was telling you, in February 2002. I was actually at a ministry where the musicians had come to break down a wall, because behind that wall they had actually they had bricked up the wall and hidden all their instruments behind it. So this is just the reverse.
that still is happening, but well, anyway, it's really take me back from where we start from the scratch and where we are now. From one darkness, we had like a short period of a flashlight and then another darkness. This is how
there was a comment that was made to me a couple of days ago that that the West had superimposed Western values into a society which wasn't ready for it. I mean, yes, you had the is that a false notion?
That does not make sense, no, because Afghanistan, inside Afghan value is under our.
They're comparing it to there's this. I said compare it to when Zahir Shah was there. It was a freewheeling, very open society.
That's how was Afghanistan during the Zahir Shah and before and after Zahir Shah till Mujahideen came. I think during the Cold War, just the idea preaching extraordinary for Islamic values were anti-Islamic. It was to be a part of the strategy from Western country was been imposed on certain groups such as Mujahideen, such as Taliban, and such as Al-Qaeda, and etc. So that's why still they are following the same. But that's not the case. The people of Afghanistan, I'm not saying we are very and extremely modern. Every country, every place have their own. But let me say one thing. Mr. Sami says Taliban in Pashtun and Pashtun Valley. What Taliban are, and during the first time and second time, both time they destroyed the history, dignity, and reputation of Pashtun inside of Afghanistan and outside of Afghanistan. They are not representing Pashtuns. They are just a group of where they are only representing their own ideology. For me, I will never say they are representing me as a Pashtun or my grandpa or grand-grandpa, or my history, or my religion as a Sunni Muslim. So they are not. They are just, if you say like they belongs to Pashtun and Pashtunwali and etc., if you see the handover process start from the northern part of the country. So that's another question. But to be honest, you say the leverage of United Nations on top of Taliban. United Nations, I really feel sorry for the language I'm using at the moment, is not an organization where they are taking care of their mandate and responsibility. What is they are ignoring is their mandate towards inside of Afghanistan.
Absolutely, spot on.
Yeah, what they are doing, they are just building their careers, providing more jobs and taking more money under the name of humanitarian crisis and etc. If you see where's the United Nations and their duty and responsibility towards Afghanistan as a state, as a nation, as a country, it's just a zero. If you see how, for instance, I had a meeting with a Zoom meeting with all these special envoys and special representative head of UNAMA. They never was like a frank and honest with every one of us. When you see their reports, they say like this amount of money was spent for this and that. But if you see what's in the real life, nothing was changed because they themselves are extremely costly organization. But still, I think we need to hold them accountable. Some transparency and accountability, some inquiries needs to be started from somewhere. But otherwise, the now United Nations and other organization is also going to part. They are paying literally for the Taliban to let their organization to work. They are giving money and authority to the Taliban. Even most of the places, they are standing and they are speaking on behalf of Taliban as a Taliban spokesperson with the word. I was surprised when Amina Mohammed, she is a deputy of the Secretary General, when she was in Afghanistan, I thought, okay, finally, a Muslim woman can understand more better than anyone. But unfortunately, when she raised the case of baby step to recognition of the Taliban, I was shocked. How you can say that as a woman? Why, as an intellectual, educated woman, you are not asking Taliban to hold them accountable, at least according to Doha Agreement, rather than asking why you are not asking for interim government, why you are not asking for the rights of people and human to be implemented in Afghanistan. So those kind of politics are really dirty politics, where there's no value that they could talk and negotiate with that, as just a temporary agenda which is coming in and out, and they are chasing each other in their own ways.
Yeah, that's true. And it's an armed takeover. So, Mr. Bhasin, if I can just come back to you, you brought up this business of the Doha meeting and how they talked about a possible political settlement, which is in the offing in September, where the division in between the Taliban and Kandahar and the Doha group would be sorted out, and it could be this Iranian model. Would you like to take us through that? Because I mean, right now it looks like as if there's an army of irregulars, who are not educated, not aware, who are, I mean, there's no security really in vast parts of Afghanistan. So could you talk us through what you've heard?
So what I've heard is that they are in the process of forming a constitution, okay, and which is basically Islamic constitution, and they have seeking help from the Indonesians, and even because, as you know, that Taliban was originally Deobandi, so they are taking help on the constitution, which the Chief Justice of Afghanistan is involved, and so they have formed a group to formulate a constitution, and secondly, they are reorganizing their militia into a formal command and control structure with uniforms. On reorganizing their militia, and what I heard is that constitution will be the structure will be similar to the Iranian structure.
My understanding, the Iran model for Afghanistan may not work, because according to that, there will be a kind of shura. I remember because I drafted the constitution for my country in the first time.
Right.
And at the time, Mujahideen had lots of appetites to have similar to Iran constitution, just to save their own space and political arena.
Right.
Because that council is having above the power of the council is above president, parliament, and everyone, because everyone needs to be approved by them, and then they could run for the election. From my understanding, in a country such as Afghanistan, nowadays there's a lot of appetites for a different type of state.
Right.
Not the Emirates or not the we had before. I think from one side is the federal state. Ideas are raising, in fact, more or more or less. On the other side, having parliamentary system is raising. Although now we are talking where shooting on air because one had. But the Taliban are not really interested to have any kind of constitution, as far as my information. They worked on a draft, they have the draft ready, but the Amir didn't let it. He said, like, okay, you don't need a constitution. That's it. Dot in. Even no negotiation about that. Because his power will be limited, and who will be the next, and how the selection will be, and how the government will be, and how where public. So they don't have appetite for that. They know it's a very short term. They will leave soon, inshallah.
Right.
Will it be an inclusive government, Mr. Bhasin? Because the talk about the inclusive government when the Doha dialogues were happening was very, very strong, right? I mean, every story talked about how everyone would be included, but there seems to be a sort of ethnic cleansing going on of the Tajiks. Where they're being decimated in the Panjshir Valley. So what happens to all of these people? Your warlords have left, have exited, but there are, I mean, the ethnic divisions in Afghanistan are still, not represented in this government.
So there is some talk of how their rights will be protected. But when you say, see, there's two differences. One is your human rights and, the rights of the civilians or the population. The other is the power structure and the what model your constitution is based on. So inclusive can only happen if there is a model close to a democracy. You know, there is some process of election or selection, as we say. But I hear that it is more like we say in the case of Pakistan, you know, selected prime minister. So, but in this case, it's determined by the people who are in power. And I think the main focus is that
Who is in power?
the
Is it
Taliban.
Kandahar or is it Doha?
No, so what I heard is that one division which is always talked about is between the Haqqanis and Kandahar. You know, I've never heard
Exactly.
about the difference between Doha and Kandahar. I think it's more, but what I've heard is, and which I and Shukriya were talking, is that, and she's right, that if you formalize a constitution, then there's a sort of an agreed format of succession and power, right? Which is right now with Shuras, it's closed doors, so we don't know what goes on. But if you formalize a constitution, then there will be a power struggle in terms of different people, in terms of their future succession.
You've also talked about the economy, Mr. Bhasin. You've actually said that the Taliban is collecting taxes and that that it will, it's got revenue coming in. And this whole business about the opium cultivation, where they, is that not a source of income for the poor Afghan?
So yes, so the drug trade is another. You need a whole episode.
The drug trade fuels the ammunition and the arms buying.
Yeah, but you have to also understand what is the demand. There was already enough arms, and there is what the war which was there pre 15th August 2021 is not there any longer. That conflict is right.
No, so basically we have the political structure which you say will be very much like Iran. The model is Iran. And you say that there's a group of people that are putting it together. You say there are no real divisions between the head of the Taliban and the Haqqani group.
No, so the divisions which I hear are between the succession of power between the Emir and the deputies, the current deputies. The division is not that much between Haqqani or the Kandaharis and Qatar.
So the acting foreign minister is having meetings with the Doha, the Qatari foreign minister. Right. So is he empowered to push this agenda forward? Is he the man who's going to forward it, Amir Muttaqi?
Yes, he's means finally major decisions will be taken back at the Shura level or the Emir level, but he represents them for sure. And I want to share in the geopolitics is, as I mentioned earlier, is because of the Ukraine, especially because of the Ukraine crisis and the geopolitical dynamics, Qatar is pushing the Americans, and because Iran and Russia are, as I hear through certain reliable sources, seriously considering recognizing the Taliban, and the US does not want to be left behind, and that because then their influence goes down,
wanes. Absolutely. Yeah, so, that's very important. That's also why India has reached out, because India also wants this north-south corridor. It wants the
strategically lose space. Like I said, we had goodwill across the board with the Afghans, and if we stay out, it's sad what happened, very frankly, but that does not help India. If we had stayed out, then we lose further influence, and we can't even engage or even prod the Taliban on certain things which we can with our goodwill amongst Afghans. I think India needs to, my view, I've always said this, India needs to engage with a much more active, proactive, serious level, because we have.
But there was a lot of criticism, Mr. Bhasin, on the fact that the Ministry of External Affairs, when it invited these people to come and do a course in Kerala, a foreign affairs course, I believe 28 out of the 30 were from the Taliban.
Yeah,
recently.
They have to be. Means naturally, if that administration is in power, they will send their people, right? So that's. But what I'm saying is, India broadly engaging is, means I believe it's a better option than non-engaging, because then we are able to do more, not only with the Taliban, but for the people who are anti-Taliban, so to say, and who are, who have been our friends for a long time. So if we do not engage, we are not a player on the table. And I think we can play a bigger role economically, which I've been trying to push, because Taliban's main agenda is because politics, see, very frankly, nor is the use pushing. When you use the word inclusive government, that is passé, Governance
No,
should
but
be.
the inclusive government should not include just people from the south of Afghanistan. It should include people from the north. It should include people from the western parts of Afghanistan.
No, you're putting inclusive in a wrong time frame. My view of inclusive was what we call the intra-Afghan dialogue, is the people who were in power earlier and who are out now. It's an engagement between them and the new regime. So it's more like the players, actors in the new regime and old regime. See, that's what I'm saying. You have to distinguish between people's rights and politics, right? Power, people in power, naturally, anyone wants to do it. And of course, I'm not saying everyone's intention is wrong. Any political leader wants to work for his or her constituency or people and protect the rights. But what I see going forward is that leverage has gone. So the resistance force, or there is others who come on Facebook and all, they're all looking at, but they all know this very clearly, that they don't have the wherewithal and the thing to just go and start something and be able to make a major difference.
So if we can just go back to Ms. Barakzai, I just wanted to conclude by asking you, Ms. Barakzai, is this the kind of thing that you had envisaged, or do you see some kind of battle coming? I mean, there are people who are, I know India has been, they've pushed India into acknowledging that they will not back the Tajiks and the Hazaras in any kind of form to form a militia against the Taliban. But do you see that kind of a battle also happening? I mean, in a sense, could there be a battle between the opposition, which has been sidelined completely and is completely fractured, and the Taliban?
It's really true that for the time, countries, states, and organizations just like to be engaged and involved with the Taliban. With a blink of eyes, they forgot who was their partner and correspondent in the last 20 years. India was also met the same strategy. So they turned their face to the Taliban. Somehow they cut, or they keep in a very low level their even communication with the non-Taliban. I would not say anti-Taliban, I would say non-Taliban political group.
Good word.
Yeah. But from my understanding, if the military resistance was an option, or if it is an option, I'm sure Russia or US may use that tool in between, because nowadays what is going on is not about Afghanistan, Taliban, anti-Taliban, and non-Taliban. It is about a region. So if the Taliban gets recognition or some sort of really good welcome from Western bloc, the Eastern will definitely react. So they're now, it's like Taliban are a piece of meat where two folks are looking who will take them first, because Taliban could challenge the US strategic and international security and US allies, and Taliban can also be a great challenge for the Eastern country, US, China, Iran, China, and Russia. So this is how Taliban are, like everybody, states like to deal with them.
So it's basically the Taliban is leading everybody on. I mean, its connections with Iran are amazing. And its connections with Russia are amazing. I mean, Russia is giving them fuel, it's giving them grain, it's giving them, every help that they can get. So I think the Taliban actually have understood, this Taliban knows how to play the game.
Well, because they have a good teachers and boss. ISI is the one. It's not a Taliban.
Right.
They are belongs to some address where even themselves may don't know how they are going to be played with. And it's not only ISI, there are all other intelligence that have been involved in Afghanistan. And now it's a great game is going on in Afghanistan land. And it's sad to see how the region will going to be disturbed and the security will be challenged on that region where every single country is looking more brighter future for their economy to be a power or superpower. So, but that challenge will come very soon. This is my analysis. I hope I will be wrong, but I feel sad for Afghanistan and for the people of Afghanistan, for my own land, for my own people, because even after 40 years of war, we don't know why we are killing each other and we are paying price with our life cost. So it's not in the packet Afghanistan, it's in the packet either east or west. So we are just a victim and we are a sandwich who's been badly smashed by all powers where they come, they taste and they leave. And we've badly been betrayed by all parties, by all powers around the globe where today they are calling themselves superpower.
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Ms. Barakzai. It was a fascinating insight into how Afghanistan is, whether re-engaging with Afghanistan is really the way forward or whether it should be encircled and forced to, adhere to international norms. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Bhasin. I appreciate you coming on the show. We will reconnect again soon, I'm sure. Hopefully good days will come for Afghanistan. Mr. Paliwal, if I could turn to you, there's an alarming report by the UN that I mentioned earlier, which says that there are terror safe havens coming up in Nuristan and Kunar provinces where the Arab fighters are being trained as suicide bombers. I mean, this is where Pakistan-supported Lashkar-e-Taiba operated from. This is where the pro-Taliban Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan operates from, as does the East Turkestan Islamic Party, the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, a new group calling itself the Tehreek-e-Tajikistan, and of course, Al-Qaeda in the subcontinent, which has openly said its reach will one day extend to Indian Kashmir. This is a UN report. It cannot be dismissed out of hand. And the Taliban have repeatedly assured the US that they will not allow their territory to be used for terrorist activities against the US. What about the rest of the, countries that are its neighbors? And I mean, we've seen very interestingly, we've seen continuing bomb blasts in Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. I mean, a suicide bomber killed 54 people, just last week. And ISIS claimed responsibility. Taliban has said it's not involved. Which brings me to the question, what is the Taliban's end game, Mr. Paliwal?
Thank you for having me here as part of this conversation on Afghanistan, Ms. Gopal. It's an honor to be here. Now, there are various layers to this question that you have asked, right, about the Taliban allowing the existence and the nourishment to various sort of terror groups, cross-border militant groups in Kunar and Nuristan. Now, we need to kind of unpack the onion, so to say, on the specific issue, which has been alive for decades in Afghanistan. Now, the first element to this is that no state, whether it was the Islamic Republic, whether it is today the Emirate, whether it was all the governments before that came into power in Kabul throughout the 70s and the 80s, the communists, none of them have enjoyed a complete writ over delivering violence and collecting taxes, and definitely having some degree of loyalty or having a social contract with citizens across the geography of Afghanistan. So this is a fractured state that we are looking, which is also quite, which has seen a lot of wars, a lot of external interventions, a lot of ideologies being experimented. And often always seeing failure on these counts and a lot of violence and loss, both of property and of lives. So I'm not surprised to see that the Taliban are struggling, or perhaps even kind of are complicit in allowing some of these groups to operate and kind of open camps in remote corners of Kunar and Nuristan. I would underscore that these are also kind of on the very peripheries of Afghanistan, and any state would have struggled to kind of counter this kind of presence on their territory. But yes, this is certainly very concerning, and this is something, as you highlighted, the Taliban promised the world not to allow if they come to power and as and when they come to power. Now, the promises that they made, were very focused to not allowing Afghan soil, Afghan territory, or resources to be used both for planning and executing terrorist attacks, especially in the United States. That primary focus on the US at that point in time when the Doha process was going on before 2021 was to ensure that the Americans accept that as a guarantee, accept that as a promise, and actually do depart Afghanistan and put an end to a war, or at least that phase of the Afghan wars. And the Taliban succeeded in doing that, not because the Americans trusted the word of the Taliban leadership, whether it's the moderate faction or anyone else, but because the Americans themselves wanted to leave the country. So it was a cop out in some sense, as we can see play out. So that is one reason why those promises of counterterrorism were made in the first place at that particular point in time, to get a deal done, get the Americans out, their European allies out, and focus that especially, focus those guarantees towards the Americans rather than anyone else, because these are the countries which were fighting the war for the past two decade or so before 2021. Now, all these groups that you mentioned, especially the Al-Qaeda in Indian subcontinent, which does have a broader agenda, which includes Kashmir, which includes parts of other parts of India, and which has been coming out with a litany of propaganda videos and has tried to recruit Muslims from India, other parts of the country, but also from Kashmir. We do see those kind of cross-border movements between these two countries, and of course with links to Pakistan that exists now. Will this stop? Will the Taliban be able to put an end to it? I'm not so sure about it. There are so many internal fissures in the Taliban that there will be limits, even if they want to put an end to all these kind of operations, whether they'll be able to do that. But I do not think that allowing these groups to operate will necessarily change the Taliban's worldview and suddenly make it directly hostile to India. I think that's a position in which the Pakistanis find themselves into as at this point in time, where there is a very clear kind of break between the Afghan Taliban and Pakistan. And we do know that the Afghan Taliban is training, arming, and supporting the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, which has been running a very effective insurgency, very violent insurgency since 2021 after the fall of Kabul. So is this a serious security threat for India moving forward? Perhaps yes, but not of the kind, not of the nature that many people have thought it would be. We need to be on our guard, but do we need to worry about this becoming a strategic threat imminently so? I'm not so sure about that.
Secondly, the Taliban have developed very strong ties with Iran. They were the first to open their embassy in Kabul. Russia did not even close its embassy. Moscow is said to have opened channels with the Taliban as far back as 2015 because it was concerned over the Islamic State Khorasan province. And now more so after Ukraine, because it sees Kabul as part of its Eurasian space. The Afghan border with various Central Asian states, precludes the notion that Russia always considers it its sphere of influence. There's China, of course, which is building bridges with the Taliban. Even though the equation with Pakistan has eroded, it's still there. Taliban's renewing its ties to the United States, and which brings me to the question which I've asked Ms. Barakzai as well. The Taliban clearly knows how to play the game. It plays Russia off against the United States. It plays Iran against the United States, China against the United States. And we in India are trapped between the hegemonic goals of Russia, China, and Iran.
Now, that's an excellent question. Is India's decision to open a technical mission in short of a year after closing the embassy in August 2021, is it a wise decision or not? I think we need to kind of understand the drivers and the conditioners of that decision. The drivers are very clearly that you do not want to leave a country which is in your neighborhood and have absolutely no presence, no eyes and ears of your own staff, your own officials trying to monitor the situation as well as they possibly can in that kind of an unforgiving environment. The only way you can justify this and also support it in some way, sustain it, is to make it a humanitarian mission, make it a mission in which you try to do to deliver some sort of an aid or some sort of relief to the people of Afghanistan. Now, of course, many would credibly counter this, saying that India's visa regime against, which is harming students, Afghan students who were studying in Indian universities, goes completely against that particular desire of supporting Afghans, which is true and also paradoxical. But the kind of support, the relief, the aid that India has offered over the past 2 years is something that the government of India is quite geared towards, just focusing on that element of the public-facing diplomacy that it does with the people of Afghanistan. The more technical aspects, the more security aspects of that mission on the ground is to make sure that you have, at least basic outreach to the Taliban. You understand what is happening in that space, what are the fault lines within Taliban, whether it's between Kabul and Kandahar or anything that is changing on the ground. How does that impact you? Earlier, you asked me, all these training camps in Kunar and Nuristan, some of our groups, including Arab fighters, which will perhaps turn their attention towards Kashmir or the rest of India. This is the kind of intelligence that the state of India would want to have in advance, in real time, to make sure that it does not, it can take preventive measures, it can take defensive measures. And for that, you need to be on the ground. So I think as far as that limited security mandate is concerned, I do see the use and the rationale for India to be there. But it's very important not to confuse this as imparting recognition or as enabling the Taliban or as in any way justifying their politics. I don't think any Indian government, whether it's coming from the Hindu nationalist kind of fold or the kind of secular liberal canon, would have anything in terms of commonalities, ideological commonalities with the Taliban. And that's something which is very important to underscore, that this is not a mission that is imagined or trying to kind of legitimize the Taliban. Yes, there is a risk. It's an active risk that even that kind of a mission being there is supportive in some ways of the Taliban. But I think it's also an admission of reality, and it's an admission of failure that, for the past 2 decades before 2021, the international community, India included, failed to deliver on the kind of promises, that they had as far as democracy and state building were concerned. And of course, India was a peripheral player in some ways to that whole effort, and the West was much more directly involved. But this is a reality, and I don't think not having that kind of a mission there would also serve anyone's purpose. So I think that those nuances have to be appreciated, and that would help us kind of assess the wisdom of that. Now, in terms of the question of recognition, formal diplomatic recognition, and should that change? I do not think that should change. And I believe that the government of India is also not of the mind that we have to do that. A good example of that was a recent kind of a spat between the Afghan representative in Delhi, Farid Mamonzai, who was the Afghan ambassador sent by the Islamic Republic, the Ghani administration, and who has been in Delhi ever since in this limbo because he's representing a state that doesn't exist. He was kind of, some officer from within the embassy tried to kind of oust him when he was traveling abroad, and it led to a lot of spat between those two figures, and the government of India stayed out of it, right? And then the government of India has maintained that, whoever is there, that is Farid, he will continue to represent Afghan interests broadly, put. So that's a very clear policy position also in terms of, hinting that India is not moving forward in terms of imparting recognition to the Taliban in the diplomatic sense. All those ideas of offering online education to some of those officials, which of course is a demand from the Taliban side, notwithstanding. So I do not believe that recognition is on the cards, or that the government of India is particularly keen to make that jump, because there is no kind of accruing benefit either to India in terms of its national interests. Now, you asked the question about Afghan-owned peace process. What does that even mean? What is the provenance? Look, this is a term that became very important, or became increasingly important post 2009, 2010. That's when the first idea that, look, this is a war to which we need a political solution. This is a war to which you cannot have a military solution. The West and the Afghan state as it was then cannot defeat the Taliban militarily, because it has cross-border support from Pakistani security agencies. The idea was to shape the negotiations, and to shape the negotiations on the terms of the Afghan government as it was, and on the terms laid down by former President Karzai, afterwards former President Ashraf Ghani. That is where the whole term comes, and that this process will be owned by the Afghans, not by Pakistan-supported proxy groups at that point in time, which was the Talibs, right? And that means different things to different people, to be very clear. For India, it has always been the sense that, in that space of negotiations, the Afghans should be able to assert themselves, should be able to curate the terms of peace to their advantage, rather than being dictated or being coerced by the Pakistani security establishment, either directly or through the Taliban on the battlefield. And that gives some degree of balance between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And this is something which is central to India's Afghanistan policy, to make sure that Afghanistan does not become a sort of a puppet state of Pakistanis. So this is what it was always meant to be. It is ironic that it is the Taliban which is imbuing some degree of balance, even if an unhealthy political balance between Afghanistan and Pakistan. It's not something that any political leader in India would support in that ideological sense. But as far as the strategic contours of the subcontinent go, the Indian security planners have clearly calculated that Pakistan being busy on its own sort of western frontiers for the foreseeable future is not entirely not entirely a bad thing as far as India's national security is concerned. And given the fact that India has a live conflict with the Chinese in the north, and you have all sorts of internal turmoil emerging in Manipur or elsewhere. So if you want to focus on that part of the world, of your national security, if you want to have a much more global presence as part of the G20, you don't want to get caught in battles with Pakistan anymore. So that strategy of not engaging with the Pakistan, and letting it be in its own space till the time there is a ceasefire at the line of control, that is something that the Indian security planners are quite okay with. And in that sense, the Talibs kind of really putting pressure on the Pakistanis today is something which is not being really seen as a huge problem per se, even if it might become a problem at a later point in time.
I'd like your view too, Mr. Paliwal, on your views on engaging with the Taliban. Mr. Bhasin has clearly said we should be pragmatic and not lose out. And there have been moves by India, as you know. In 2022, Delhi sent its first official delegation to Kabul, where JP Singh, followed this old formula, offering aid while meeting, Amin Muttaqi and Stanexai and, Sirajuddin Haqqani, the men who clearly call the shots. Is that wise? Is that the best way forward? India says, we should have a better staffed technical mission, which is not really actual recognition, So where does that leave us?
Thanks for that question, Ms. Gopal. I think there's, whether to conceptualize the Taliban as some sort of very adept players of a great game, or as a movement which is struggling to sort of govern, I think that's a very fine line. Firstly, I personally don't think there is anything great about this game. It's full of tragedy. Secondly, the Taliban, I think they have realized one thing. The fundamental aspect is that no outside power, including the Pakistanis, will come and try to run the country for them anymore. The idea of external interventions after 2 decades worth of war fatigue is not, that clock is not turning back anytime soon. So they do not have a direct threat from any of the regional powers, barring perhaps Pakistan in a kinetic sense, not in terms of interfering in the governance, the daily governance or routine kind of administration of the Taliban at that level. They have a active conflict with Pakistan that they'll manage in the external sphere, but they do not have any extra regional threat per se, where they see that the Western countries or China or India is using force directly to come in and shape the conflict and its contours moving forward. This basic fact gives them a lot of leverage to do a lot of the things that they're doing, whether it's kind of having this gender apartheid, not allowing women to work, not allowing girls to study, or hosting all sorts of unsavory groups on Afghan soil. They have realized that they can push the baton of tolerance of various powers at this point in time without necessarily leading to a short circuit, political short circuit within the Afghan the administration as they run it. And I think that's about it. The fact that the Americans are going out again and again, asking them to deliver on basic issues of inclusivity in the national politics, basic issues of just allowing women to be equal stakeholders of this country as they deserve to be, as they actually are, and are not being kind of allowed to practice that. That also shows that the Taliban, the Americans don't have the kind of leverage over the Taliban, even if they have access to a lot of pots of money that they can come and give to this government. They do not enjoy that kind of leverage which they thought they would. And this is something, that's about it as far as this whole saga goes. If there is serious internal collapse in the Taliban, I think a lot of these outreach that they're doing, whether it's to the Iranians or the Russians or the Chinese or the Americans or the Indians as well, a lot of it will just boil down to factionalism, and that's something which is a much more worrying sort of a scenario. It's not Taliban trying to kind of a fracture in the Taliban's kind of political fabric, and the fault lines, as you mentioned, already exist, and there is this whole agreement, a peace accord, intra-Taliban peace accord, sort of being curated, and perhaps will be ratified or baptized in September next month. But if those fault lines explode moving forward, which there is a chance, we cannot discount that, then we are looking at much more acute instability moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for participating in the discussion. Viewers, please click on the New Indian Express and the Global Express web. Thank you for watching.